Hi, I'm Steffany Strange. Want to hear something scary?
Lane and Alani were walking home late on New Year's Eve after a party. It was Lane's idea to take a shortcut through the woods, using the light of their cell phones to help see the way. The ground was icy and very slippery, but Lane was stubborn and refused to admit the path was dangerous. They were about halfway through the thick trees when they heard a branch snap behind them. "Hello?" called out Lane, confident as ever. There was no reply, but there was another noise. Lane was about to ask again when out of nowhere, a figure appeared with a hatchet. It was a young teen in pigtails and a dirty blue school uniform. Suddenly, she screamed and swung the hatchet into Lane's head. Alani tried to scream, but a hand clamped over her mouth from behind, and she was knocked out cold. When she woke up, she was surrounded by shadowy figures. She stood up slowly, realizing she was still in the woods. Her head throbbed. Leaning against a tree for support, Alani noticed the young woman wearing a ripped mask over her nose and mouth. "A pleasure to have some new blood." She motioned for Alani to follow her. Alani obeyed. More of the figures had appeared. Alani whimpered as she was dragged into the circle of people. One wore a beige trench coat and a white mask. There was also the teen with pigtails, wearing a filthy and now bloody blue school uniform. And another person with gray skin, no eyelids, no hair. Despite their odd appearances, it was the final being who caused her stomach to drop. He stood over 8 feet tall with a face as blank as death. His limbs and torso were long and slender. The tall, thin man advanced and raised a hand. Alani was paralyzed. Suddenly, her eyes started to close, head still swimming. She fell to the ground, unconscious again. When she awoke in a darkened room, something was very different. She felt changed. Looking down, she saw she was now wearing black leather gloves. Her festive party dress was now a dark trench coat. She was wearing military fatigues and military-type boots. Most surprisingly of all was a 3-foot sword in a sheath at her waist. She drew the weapon and admired how the blue and silver blade caught the moonlight coming in through a window. And she was overcome with an urge to use it, to hurt someone, to kill someone. Alani turned to see the teen with pigtails. She handed over a mask and grinned. Alani examined it. "Put on the mask," Pigtails insisted. "Join Slender Man's ranks." Unable to control her actions in a nightmare, Alani screamed as her hands acted on their own accord. Her scream cut off as her own hands pulled the mask over her face. All remaining thoughts about her past were wiped clean. All memories were replaced, and she felt the certainty of her new purpose, a surging strength and desire to kill. Pigtails watched her, her head cocked to the side like a bird. "Now you will serve as an agent of Slender Man, obeying all that is instructed." Alani nodded, picking up her new weapon, the sword, watching as her colleagues, her new family, entered the room. She turned to look at herself in the mirror. Her eyes glowed in different colors, one amber, the other all black. "Let's spill some blood," she said hollowly. Only serving Slender Man's will remained. She no longer remembered her past life. Alani was gone. She now lived for the thrill of purging those that did not follow him. The group exited the woods, heading for the festively decorated houses in the distance, towards the sounds of New Year's gatherings and other parties. Her new life as an agent of Slender Man had begun. This new year would belong to him and his now loyal minions. He controlled her now, and she would kill or die for him. No questions asked.
Until I was 13 years old, I lived in a small village in Scotland. It was a very peaceful and serene area with a gentle river not too far away. I lived in a house with my mother and grandmother. I'd never met my father. I figured he left the family before I was born. Neither my mother nor grandmother ever talked about him, so I never really asked about him. It was the morning before my 13th birthday. My mom came into my room and sat on my bed. She jokingly asked if I wanted a unicorn for my birthday. Like most little girls, I had a horse phase, but I was slowly growing out of it. So I just told her that I'd love some more books. There actually was something that I wanted for my birthday, but I didn't think my mom would be happy about it. I'd be fine with just the books. I loved to read, after all. One of my favorite things to do was go out into the nearby forest, lean against my favorite tree, and read a book. And that's what I did later that day. I tucked my copy of Where the Red Fern Grows under my arm and walked to my spot. I was lost in my book for maybe 15 minutes when I was interrupted by a sound. It sounded like the neigh of a horse. I thought it was really odd, so I decided to see where it was coming from. It led me to the river. Standing by the water was the most beautiful and majestic white horse I'd ever seen. Its coat was smooth and shiny, its mane was long and luxurious. It turned its sparkling black eyes toward me, and I felt compelled to go closer. I know it sounds strange, but 12-year-old me felt as if the horse was asking me to ride it. I didn't hear the words, but I felt it inside me. It was so weird. I continued to approach the magnificent beast when I heard my mother's voice, not in my head, but echoing among the trees. I snapped out of my trance and began to walk back home, bidding the mysterious horse goodbye. At the dinner table, I told my family about the horse that I saw. They both stopped and looked at me. "Are you sure it was a horse that you saw?" my mother asked. "The forest can play tricks on your eyes." "I'm positive it was a horse," I replied. "It was so beautiful. What do you think it was doing out there?" "I don't know what it was you saw, but you should probably stay away from the river. It's not safe." I remember feeling really confused and frustrated by their response to my experience. Why didn't they just believe me? The next morning, I woke up to my mom singing happy birthday to me in my room. She said my grandma had gone into town for a special birthday surprise, so we would celebrate when she got back. My mom asked me what I wanted to do while we waited, and I told her that I was really close to finishing my book and just wanted to do that. So I went back to my favorite spot and began to read. Moments later, I heard someone calling my name. "V. Hey, V." I looked up, and there was a kind-looking woman, possibly in her 20s, peering from around a tree. "You're Douglas's daughter, no?" I cocked my head at her in disbelief and replied, "How did you know?" She smiled warmly and gestured for me to follow her. "He wanted you to have this for your 13th birthday. Come, now." I knew I wasn't supposed to follow strangers deeper into the forest. I knew that. But she knew who I was, so maybe she wasn't a complete stranger. I closed my book and followed her. She led me to the same clearing by the river I was at yesterday. And there it was, the same white horse. "It's all yours, dear. Happy birthday." The horse seemed to nod its head at me, almost as if reassuring me that, yes, all of this was true. My father was out there somewhere and sent this horse as my birthday gift. I had so many unanswered questions, but in that moment, all of my concerns sort of drifted away. The only thought on my mind was that I needed to ride that horse. It was even more gorgeous up close. As if under a spell, my hand reached out to stroke its mane. But after one stroke, I realized something was very wrong. My hand was stuck. It wouldn't come off. While I frantically tried to pry it off, I heard the woman laughing maniacally behind me. Then suddenly, a gunshot. I turned around to see the woman's body on the ground morph into the body of a dead black horse. And a few feet away was my grandmother, aiming a gun right at me with a cake box at her feet. Please forgive me, V. Now hold still. I ducked my head and felt liquid fire tear through my fingers. She had shot my hand. I grabbed my bleeding digits with my other hand and screamed wildly. But I was free. I ran toward my grandmother while the horse's body began to shrivel and fall into the river. After my grandmother had bandaged my hand and I had calmed down, I asked her what the hell happened back there. "I am so sorry, V," she said, "but I had no choice. That kelpie was going to drag you into the river and drown you." Kelpie? What's a kelpie? They're malicious horses that live near the water. They can shapeshift into human beings to try and trick you into riding their sticky bodies. That's actually how your father died. I took a moment to let that new information sink in. But why didn't we move? Why didn't we leave this area? Because we didn't want to believe that's what happened, V, my mother cried. We moved to the city shortly after, far away from any large body of water. I may have lost a piece of me that day, but I also got my birthday wish. I finally learned the truth.
Due to public health mandates and then a huge renovation, Camp Chaturanga in Illinois had been shut for 2 summers. So when the camp announced a limited reopening, 12 teenagers, anxious to be reunited with their old pals, jumped at the chance to attend. The first week was filled with kayaking, campfires, and s'mores. Late one night in Cabin Bluethorn, when all the adults and counselors were hopefully fast asleep, 6 of the 12 campers used the Ouija board, played light as a feather, stiff as a board, and then started telling scary stories. The night was off to a fun start, but when Joelle began to tell her story, the others grew quiet. Joelle shared an urban legend that she had just learned of. Candyman. A man with a hook for a hand and a taste for murder. Among other things, he was known to lure kids with candy, and if his hook didn't get you, a swarm of bees would. The others held their breath as Joelle said that she'd been told that there was one way to guarantee a meeting with Candyman, but only if you were brave enough to do it. You have to say his name, Candyman, 5 times while looking into a mirror. Her friends chuckled at the absurdity of the tale before quickly looking around for a mirror. The only one big enough they could find was in the cabin's bathroom, and there was no way they'd all fit in there. So, closing the door to the small bathroom, Joelle instead suggested using the selfie feature on her phone. That way, the entire group could do it together, which was great, as no one wanted to do it alone. They huddled around Joelle's phone, everyone in frame, their faces reflected back at themselves, waiting. And so it began. In unison, they chanted, "Candyman, Candyman, Candyman, Candyman." Everyone took a breath and looked at each other. Should they? Candy. Just then, a shadow moved quickly in the selfie frame behind them. They all jumped and screamed, scrambling and searching around. Outside the window was Leisha, another camper. Behind her in the distance were the other campers playing hide and seek with flashlights. She asked what they were doing. Joelle explained, asking if she wanted to join them. "Nope," she said, running back to the game outside. So after calming down and regrouping, it was time to try again. They all huddled in and began their chant, this time at a faster pace. They said his name once, twice, 4 times, then all together for a 5th time. Candyman! For a brief moment, nothing happened. Until they all began to giggle. How ridiculous they all felt for believing in such a made-up story. Then the bathroom door flew open, the force of it making the wooden door splinter against the wall. Standing there, cloaked in darkness, was a figure. It was well over 6 feet tall, wearing a long coat with wool lapels. Slowly, stepping out of the small enclosed space, it raised its arm, revealing a hook embedded into the stump. A deep, rusty voice answered, "Yes." The teens scattered, screaming. One teenager raced for the door, but with a swift swing of his arm, Candyman gutted her. 2 others were trying to escape out the window, but his hook ended up in both of their backs, impaling them like cattle about to be hung. While retrieving his hook out of their bodies, the 3 remaining campers made it outside, crying for help. They kept looking back at the cabin, but he wasn't coming after them. The other campers ran over, unsure what to believe, but seeing there was trouble, grabbing their crying friends as they yelled about the man who came out of the bathroom. They all headed towards the counselor's cabin in the distance. Suddenly, they heard humming coming from Cabin Bluethorn. Ow! Joelle looked at her arm. She'd been stung. Bees! She screamed. Everyone took off running, but the swarm separated the 3 survivors from the others. Over 5,000 bees moved like one giant body, stinging the remaining selfie campers from Cabin Bluethorn. All the others could do was run for help. Within minutes, there was silence. The remaining bees flew off into the night, and all that remained were 3 almost unrecognizable, bloated and punctured bodies. No hook-handed man was ever found. No one brought to justice for the murders. The bees could not be explained even by nature experts. As for the 6 other campgoers, well, they'll be staying at home next summer, staying far away from reflective surfaces, and will never, ever dare to say his name, just in case he's waiting to finish off the job.
Thanks so much for listening. Like and share if this video gave you the chills. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the bell for notifications. See you next time.